One word detonated everything, and now Prince Harry isn't just facing defeat, he's staring down a financial collapse that could rewrite his entire future, all because he said it out loud when the world was watching.
In a characteristically unhinged and mad rant, says, yeah, the verdict, it was shocking, unwarranted, and obviously a whitewash, yeah? Now, that is outrageous. That is an obnoxious thing to say. It's my understanding that King Charles is deeply unhappy about Harry's remarks because as head of state, King Charles is the figurehead of the royal courts of justice. Therefore, Harry's remarks are highly embarrassing. The verdict was handed down, and Harry says it was shocking, unwarranted, and an obvious whitewash. What an insult, and there's every chance that the judge involved, Mr. Justice Nicholan, will be furious too. And I've been told by legal experts, Justice Nicholan could well side with the Daily Mail.
The moment that word left Prince Harry's mouth, something shifted, something irreversible. Whitewash, not whispered. Not implied, thrown directly at a high court judge in the middle of the most devastating legal loss of his life. And suddenly, this wasn't just about losing a case. This became about consequences, massive ones. The kind that don't just damage reputations, they drain fortunes. The kind that make people quietly ask a question nobody wants to say too loudly. Will King Charles step in and make this disappear? Because here's what actually happened, and it's more brutal than the headlines admit. Mr. Justice Nicholan sat in London's High Court and dismantled everything. Not some of it, not most of it. Every single one of the 97 allegations brought by Prince Harry and his fellow claimants, including Elton John, Baroness Darren Lawrence, Elizabeth Hurley, Sadie Frost, and former MP Simon Hughes, collapsed completely. 11 weeks. Years of preparation. Gone, and instead of silence, instead of retreat, Prince Harry doubled down. Alongside Doreen Lawrence, Prince Harry called the ruling a complete and obvious whitewash. Strong words, dangerous words, words that don't just echo, they trigger reactions. And buried inside that judgment was something even more explosive, something people rushed past too quickly. A key witness someone Prince Harry's case leaned on crumbled under pressure. Not a minor inconsistency, not a technical slip, a collapse at the core. Evidence that didn't just weaken the case, it hollowed it out from the inside. When your strongest pillar disowns itself mid-trial, what follows isn't injustice, it's inevitability. And suddenly, the narrative shifts. Was this ever about proof, or was it always about belief? But Prince Harry didn't accept that version of events. He couldn't, because accepting it would mean admitting something far bigger, that the entire case may have been built on something far less solid than it appeared. So instead, he spoke, and that's where everything spiraled.
Of the Daily Mail, and now the head of Associated Newspapers, he says that the total legal costs for both sides are in excess of $75 million. Now, a source close to the Daily Mail said the company fully intends to go for the jugular in recovering as much of its costs as possible. This ties in with what we discussed the other day when I said that the Daily Mail are going to wage war on Harry because they're extremely angry that this happened. They're bitter. They feel aggrieved, and some of their fantastic, talented journalists have had so much stress, so much anxiety, worrying about their livelihoods and about their careers and, of course, their reputations. Because in journalism, if you don't have your reputation, you have nothing. So a source at the Daily Mail says the company wants to, and I quote, go for the jugular in recovering as much of its costs as possible.
Now the reaction isn't quiet. It's loud, furious, embarrassed, because this didn't just hit the court, it hit the crown itself. King Charles, as head of state, stands as the symbolic authority behind the royal courts of justice. And suddenly, Prince Harry's words weren't just criticism, they were seen as an attack on the very system that operates in King Charles's name. That's not just awkward, that's explosive. And then comes the number, the one that makes everything real. Associated Newspapers has already spent more than $50 million defending itself, and now it wants it back, every pound, maybe more. A 2-day hearing looms July 29th and 30th, where the question won't be whether Prince Harry lost. That's settled. The question will be how much he pays for losing the way he did. Because this isn't just about legal fees anymore, this is about conduct, behavior, words, and those words, they may have just made everything worse.
The claimants are believed to have, after the event, insurance arranged through a business called Temple Legal. It's called after the event insurance. The idea is when you sue someone, you've got this insurance, and therefore they will pay out a bit if you lose. Now, the insurance is understood to cover approximately $19 million of potential costs. Now, remember, Paul Dacre is looking for $75 million. The insurance, at best, will cover $19 million, which is, of course, a fraction of the overall figure. The Daily Mail previously told the court it had already incurred $10 million in costs and expected to spend millions more. Now, because Harry's lawyers were acting on conditional fee arrangements, he may avoid paying his own lawyer's fees if the insurers respond in full. But the problem you got is that Harry's conduct during and after the trial could increase their liability. In other words, Harry's reaction, calling it an obvious whitewash, may well prevent the insurers from paying out. After the judgment, Prince Harry publicly criticised Mr. Justice Nicholan, describing the ruling, as I say, as a complete and obvious whitewash. Now, a source close to Harry described issuing that statement as, and I quote, very stupid and very unnecessary.
Because legal experts are circling one terrifying possibility: an indemnity cost order. Not standard, not forgiving. This is the harsh version, the kind reserved for cases where the court decides someone crossed a line. And if that line was crossed, if Prince Harry's reaction is seen as unacceptable, then the protection he thought he had starts to vanish. Caps get lifted, limits disappear, and suddenly the number becomes undefined. That's the trap. That single word whitewash wasn't just emotional. It may have been financially catastrophic. Somewhere behind closed doors, lawyers are now trying to contain it, reshape it, soften it without undoing it. But the damage already done. And beneath all of this sits something even more fragile: the safety net. Insurance, the quiet shield Prince Harry reportedly had in place. But policies come with conditions. And when those conditions are tested, when behavior is seen as undermining the system itself, coverage can shrink or disappear. And if that happens, the gap between what Prince Harry owes and what gets covered becomes something far more dangerous. Not theoretical, not technical, personal. A financial exposure that suddenly feels very real. Because this isn't just a bill anymore, it's a reckoning. And then comes the deeper sting. The backlash isn't just from headlines, it's from the system itself. Alex Chalk, Robert Buckland, Lord Burnett of Malden. Not commentators, not outsiders. Figures who once ran the legal system now openly condemning the remarks, calling them unacceptable, calling them dangerous. Because when a judge is attacked, it isn't just the individual, it's the institution. And that's where the tension tightens. Because every judge acts in the name of the king. Every ruling carries that symbolic weight. So when Prince Harry accused the court, what was he really accusing? And who did it ultimately reflect back on? And just days later, a quiet family meeting at Highgrove. The same King Charles, the same Prince Harry, sitting across from each other as if nothing had happened. And this is where everything tightens, where the story stops being just about a courtroom loss and starts circling something far more uncomfortable. Because the moment people began asking whether King Charles might step in, the entire situation shifted from legal drama into something that feels almost institutional, almost inevitable, like history quietly repeating itself in a way nobody wants to admit out loud. Because if King Charles does intervene, if King Charles chooses to help Prince Harry cover even part of that bill, it doesn't just solve a financial problem, it sends a signal, a message that echoes far beyond one case, one comment, one disastrous word spoken in frustration. It would mean that consequences tied directly to Prince Harry publicly undermining the judiciary operating in King Charles's own name can still be softened, still be absorbed, still be quietly handled behind closed doors. And people are watching that possibility with a level of intensity that feels different this time, sharper, less forgiving, because the scale of what's at stake is no longer symbolic. It's measurable, tens of millions, potentially more. And the silence from Buckingham Palace, that silence isn't calming anything. It's doing the opposite. No confirmation, no denial, no carefully worded reassurance, just a vacuum. And in that vacuum, speculation grows louder, faster, more detailed, because the question itself, will King Charles help Prince Harry, has already taken on a life of its own. Because becoming less about whether it happens and more about what it would mean if it does, because patterns matter, and people remember patterns. This isn't the first time the institution has been accused of quietly smoothing over the fallout of a personal crisis involving a member of the family. The instinct to contain, to manage, to prevent damage from spilling into the public sphere, it's not new. But the difference now is scale and visibility. This wasn't a private mistake. This wasn't something whispered behind palace walls. This happened in public in a joint statement aimed directly at a sitting judge after a total legal collapse that left no room for ambiguity. And that's what makes the comparison so unsettling. Prince Harry has spent years building a financial identity that exists partly because of the very system now being challenged. Inherited wealth tied to royal history, deals built on personal narrative, a global profile shaped by the same media ecosystem now sitting across the courtroom demanding repayment. And yet, even with that level of financial power, legal experts are openly questioning whether this bill, this single sequence of events, could strain it in ways that were never expected. Because when the case itself is dismantled, when a 46-day trial results in a judgment so detailed, so deliberate that every allegation is rejected, something else becomes unavoidable. The rules didn't bend. They didn't adjust. They didn't accommodate. They applied completely. And when Prince Harry responded the way Prince Harry did, it wasn't just defiance, it was exposure. Exposure to a system that doesn't always react kindly to being challenged after delivering a verdict that comprehensive. And that's where the irony sharpens into something almost brutal. The same institution Prince Harry accused of causing harm is now positioned to deliver the most tangible consequence of all, not through headlines, not through speculation, but through a number, a figure attached to a legal bill that could redefine everything. Because this isn't reputational damage anymore. This is financial reality. And then there's the question of who stands beside Prince Harry now. Elton John, one of the most financially secure figures connected to the case, is reportedly expected to support others, to help those less equipped to handle the fallout. But not Prince Harry. Not this time. And that detail sits quietly in the background, almost unnoticed, but it matters. Because it suggests something subtle but significant. This may be a moment Prince Harry faces largely alone. And when you layer that over everything else, the uncertainty around insurance coverage, the potential removal of cost protections, the possibility of an unlimited financial exposure determined by how the court interprets behavior, it starts to feel less like a legal dispute and more like a slow-moving reckoning that has been building for years. Because behavior has a pattern. Decisions have a pattern. And sometimes those patterns collide with a system that doesn't adjust to accommodate them. Sometimes they collide in a way that produces a moment like this public, expensive, and impossible to quietly reverse. And still, the most uncomfortable part lingers. Not the money, not the verdict, not even the backlash. The lingering tension sits inside that single unresolved question. Because if King Charles steps in, the story changes in one direction. And if King Charles doesn't, it changes in another. Either way, something shifts. And right now, nobody knows which way it's going to break.